Welcome to Technology Tangents. We get leaders together to discuss the important tech of today and the implications for tomorrow. Our discussions are fun, lighthearted, and frankly opinionated, but hopefully gives you a sense of what matters, what to pay attention to, and what to ignore. Joining us, our CEO of North America, Kevin. How are you today?
Doing great. Excited to be here. First recording of the year.
Happy 2025.
So, thank you.
In this lovely office, so you get a CEO on your podcast and suddenly your setup gets improved. I like it.
It does in our other CEO's office, but that is all good.
It's because of you. We have the juice now to make that a reality. That's really what's going on here. Yeah.
I appreciate that. This is all you're going to get. So
that's all we're going to get. This
set
is
expectations.
Excellent. Jason, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm not sure about the couch setup. I mean, it's a lot more comfortable, but I don't have my laptop with all my notes, and we're to see how it goes.
They weren't helping you anyway. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
I'll have to see how it goes. But it is a disturbing trend of starting the year off doing one at lunch again. Which we've talked about, but
Well, listen, I just think that your contribution to so his is to get to the office. That's pretty good. Yours can be your grumbling stomach in the middle of the podcast, random. It's like an Easter egg. That's really what it is.
Sure.
It's an Easter egg. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today about 2025. We're going to do predictions as we did last year. If I were smarter or more brave.
Prepared, maybe.
Brave.
Okay, we'll use that word.
I'll go with brave.
Okay.
Brave. I would have pulled up our last year's predictions to see how well we did. Actually, we did okay. I did glance at them. We did okay. We did pretty good.
I don't even remember what we predicted last year.
Well, there you go. There you have it. But this year, I really have 10 topics that I want to talk to you guys about. Curious, we can go one by one. We can do them in any order. But, one of the themes that I saw at CES this year was, of course, AI. AI was everywhere. We talked about that last year. That was going to be really the whitewashing of AI across all software, every piece of product that we saw. That is in full swing. We're at peak AI whitewashing, I would say. Every single vendor had AI, powered by AI. And most of them had like zero AI in them and didn't even make sense. It was like, here's an incandescent light bulb with AI. What is that even supposed to mean? I have no clue, but we saw stuff like that at CES this year. So that's definitely peak hysteria in that way. But on the flip of that, I do think 2025, from my standpoint on AI, is that we're going to start really seeing meaningful results being delivered across a wide range of businesses. So I think that many companies have been playing with it. They've been toying with it, and they've certainly branded everything they do as AI. But this is the year where they'll actually start integrating those into their workflows, into their businesses, and we're going to see some real meaningful results coming from that. We're seeing some early stuff already. Actually, we're going to try some AI stuff in this podcast coming up in a couple months here, in the next couple of months. And that is that, a camera, for example, that is AI powered and tracks us and will flip across. AI editing software. There's a really cool AI product I tried. So I recorded some video while CES. Of course, it's like 150,000 people. It's really noisy in the background. It actually just isolated the voice. So you upload it, grabs the video, it automatically rips out just the voice and then plays it back. And it did a pretty good job. But I think things like that is what we're going to see, is really meaningful results. You may not even know it's AI. I think that's probably a good sign, actually, that it worked well, as you didn't even know it was there. You just know, hey, this is a really cool feature. So what do you guys think? AI trends for 2025, Jason?
I'm going to go with the open sourcing of models. I think, with Llama taking off, being well received, a lot of the NVIDIA offerings are now have packaged up open source models in their platform that people can run without additional inference costs other than the compute, but it's not charged by inference like OpenAI or someone. And I think just the general concern people have around data going to a third party, SaaS offering around the modeling is, I think you're going to see a lot of people experiment and move towards more of like self-hosted open source models. I say self-hosted also, in the cloud, but, using some of the model hosting things and that, from NVIDIA or the cloud native providers like Amazon or Google, but doing that with open source models, I think it's going to be a big trend that people are going to start doing. Now, whether that lasts long term or they get comfortable with it like they have with the cloud and gone more towards the kind of PaaS and SaaS offerings. I think that pendulum will swing back, but this is the year the pendulum swings the other way.
So when you think about AI models being self-hosted, are you thinking like large language models specifically, or are you thinking more traditional machine learning AI models?
No, large language model, using Llama for things like, why do I want to connect, buy licenses, connect to, OpenAI, which is, an external service, and run everything through that and deal with all those licensing, privacy, security, connectivity issues and cost, when I can host Llama in a container. And, as the models get, all they seem to all be, approaching some asymptote, is really all of that worth it for a 0.05% or whatever percent, improvement in performances? That would be my one prediction. I have a second. If I get to,
Sure.
Do I get to?
Well, I want to push on this first one. One more question on the first one, though. It seems to me that a lot of the companies we work with, they've been playing with these large language models. They've made some progress using them, but they don't really have great use cases delivering value yet. Do you think that they will start there because it's easier? Here's an API, everything's managed for me, I'm going to figure it out? Or do they jump straight to self-hosted, open source, Llama, for example, type models?
I think that what will happen, and again, this is a prediction, so this is all speculative, but that's the point. What will happen is people will come up with those use cases, and the compliance folks will get involved, and the legal folks, and the contract and vendor management and IT will all get involved in like, whoa, wait a minute, we're not pushing this, critical piece of data or, recipe for, secret recipe for the spices, whatever, out into this third-party service. We're going to, find some way to do this within our own four walls, and that's going to force people, all these other constraints are going to force people to go. I don't think anybody's going to want to do that. I think people would love to just sign up with,
so the pilots,
whatever.
POCs will still be inside of these sort of managed services, but as soon as they say, hey, look, we have something working, to get that into production, you think it's going to immediately swap? So would you even suggest companies then spend energy with OpenAI, or do you just start with the open sourced models as the initiation point, jumping off point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say the latter. If you built out a way to, if you have a way to try and do them, like, you don't want to set all that up for each POC, which may not be relevant. I mean, to me, I would use something like, OpenAI, whatever, or Gemini, to go try it out. But again, once it crosses over into that sensitive data, scale, all of those things, by the way, that's another problem with some of the public services. They get real rate limited, and we've actually seen that, even here at Credera with just our 4,000 employees,
our internal services,
with our internal things built on those platforms, that we run into the rate limits all the time. And like, you're going to be Exxon, you're going to put, or McDonald's, and you're going to put 2 million, 3 million people using this thing all the time. I don't,
unlikely, right?
Yeah, unlikely. Now, the question would be like, is there the compute, even if can you self-host that much compute to generate them? But even with an open source model, they
released their little mini supercomputer now. Maybe everybody buys these.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that should be my AI prediction, is we're going to run out of compute to do all the inference we want to.
I don't think that's a prediction. I think we're already there.
Yeah, that's true.
All Jason's themes: Edge, Bitcoin, AI, they all come together at the same time.
Yes.
That's exactly right. All right, what's your second prediction, Jason?
What was my? You got me off track. What was my second prediction?
Phishing, definitely phishing.
AI
phishing goals.
Phishing.
Yeah, AI is going to enhance phishing stories, performance,
optimization. All right, I'll think of it in a second. I'll come back to it.
Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you know,
We'll have a lightning round after Kevin.
lightning round. You know, I have a couple. I don't know if these are predictions, but I think it's an interesting themes that we're seeing right now between what's going on between Google and Apple and search. What's going on between the valuation and Anthropic last week. You're going on just the construct of like AI is in everything, and so you know we'll jump from that marketing where everyone says it, where it just everything assumes it'll be used by that. You know, I'm intrigued then now to what's the ROI. One of my interesting kind of the questions behind, like, say, you know, search and Anthropic valuation, and even some of the fact that, you know, where you can pick up NVIDIA chips now is that if we start to be in a spot where maybe the models, the diminishing returns on the incremental growth of the models, so now we're going to start to have to really have valuation and impact of what they're doing and how that fits. You know, I think going back to companies now are going to be really forced to now really get past hype, ideation, you know, proof of concepts into really figuring out where does it work. And so it's possible that will shift back more into work between companies. It may shift a bit more now into our business, professional services versus the hardware model providers. You know, Jason, you're going through an application of like, well, how do you use the data and the models? Like, you know, I think it may start, at least from my more kind of strategy business perspective, I'm thinking about just, well, you know, where do you go? You know, what is that going to mean for terms of growth and how we work through it? But I think this is a year for companies to really start to see how it's accelerating really either the growth of what they're offering, the human capital savings. I mean, I think just, you know, Vincent, you and I were talking earlier this week just around just even how it's going to change how we do research, thinking, how that plays out. And I think that's where a lot of companies will be at. But so, which to me is exciting to actually get, you know, maybe it's less sexy than the technical stuff, but really around how do you actually start to get valuation in, which is why I think you're starting to see some of the concerns about the valuation of the tech companies, whereas we may be going back now, you actually to figure out what you do with it, which is then goes back into not a second, but it's kind of related, is that, yeah, I feel like the macro picture has changed a bit in the last 2 months, you know, maybe a little bit unexpected, right? Coming post-election, you had all these different things. You know, now we're rethinking what is going to happen or not happen with the monetary policy, you know, what's investment, you know, it's a lot of different things, which then actually ultimately I think AI is going to be huge impact, positive impacts, I believe, and to help work through that. But the world's a bit different today than it was in mid-November, which is a bit surprising to me, actually. So.
Yeah, no, it is surprising, I think. And, you know, we had this moment prior to last year, prior to the big AI, I mean, even 2 years ago, really prior to the AI movement, where effectively everybody, all economists, 80+% of them were convinced that it was going to be a recession. We had to have this sort of pullback, and this big breakthrough called generative AI really buoyed everybody. It lifted all ships in that regard. And the economy has just really taken off on the promise, on the hope that we will see massive gains. And we've seen some. Like I said, we have some clients that have literally, we've worked with them on delivering 100 million plus of incremental revenue to one company. So that's huge. It's a huge deal. I think most companies, most projects are not there yet. And that's why I say for 2025, I think that's where they're going to get to. They're going to start seeing these, maybe not that scale, but they're going to start seeing them. And I think that the market is starting to come to grips with, maybe it's not quite as fast and as big as we had hoped, but it's still there. And so it becomes this really tenuous place to live, which is how much of that do you price in now on the expectation, on the hope, on the promise, versus waiting and sort of marking your book down, marking it to what real market is today on actual revenue. That's tough. I'm not sure.
Well, just even, you know, this has been in our business for as old as time, but like, you know, where is it human capital savings, which at the end of the day is relatively minor, versus true incremental growth that happens because you're essentially having your systems work almost with really, you know, no, you know, intervention besides it's going. And I don't know if that's, you know, if I were to predict it, maybe it's not meant to be pessimistic, and maybe it's a little bit towards my orientation, but I do think we're going to be forced to work through the human capital savings, both in terms of cost savings plus acceleration of capability, but it's much less frothy than some of the valuations you've seen. So
that's right. I mean, look, you know, most of the savings we've seen, not all, but most of the things we've seen in public, you know, think Klarna as an example, or think IKEA as an example, they have been effectively saving hours of people's time. Most companies, because the market's been relatively bullish recently, haven't done a huge number of layoffs. Now, we've seen some in tech, we've seen some across other companies, but they've done a lot of repurposing. if you think of IKEA, they said, well, look, all these calls from direct, we don't need as many. 80% of them are now handled by AI. Yeah. We'll allow them to go be designers, and we'll sell incremental services of design services using Billy AI as their sort of bot that they can use to make that process better, and a little bit of training, no doubt. Is that really going to be what continues, or do we actually have to start laying people off effectively to realize those gains? I think it'll depend a lot on that macro climate, broadly speaking, and that will then determine a lot of how bullish or bearish do we end up being in 25. It's unclear to me, though. Jason, did you think of your other one?
I did.
Okay,
I did
please,
remember.
go ahead.
So, I saw, and I think a lot of people have talked about Satya Nadella's comment that AI is the end of SaaS, that you can just have the data and then the tools, AI can provide information or update those as necessary. I do think there's probably some truth in that. And so I think this is maybe the year of agent and tools, right? Using agents, essentially agents being different ways to, take a statement and break things into a set of tasks, and tools being, ways for the AIs to go implement and do those tasks. And can you build, systems, components, solutions around an agent that identifies and uses tools, based on natural language? And in some way, I envision somewhat of a marketplace of those things. Mm-hmm. In other words, does the LLM essentially become like the compute essentially layer, that not exactly, but like that runs, agents and tools from this marketplace, and out of that, do you get a lot of the behavior of other third-party software? And I think you'll see. I think some of those solutions start to arise. Maybe, we're not going to get rid of all SaaS in 2025, but I think you'll see a lot of investment, some really cool agent and tool-based solutions come along and start that kind of trend. That was my other prediction.
I was going to say what's interesting on building on top of that, when you think about, again, model means different things to different people, but if we really start to think about the evolution, the models become the business processes that they support, and really that's where you start to see that. Because I just listening to you, Jason, I still think about just seeing some of our own priorities as a company for the year, and you different systems and processes, and it's just really interesting. I'm like, we still end up, well, we got to improve our sales. So we need Salesforce, we need this, and and I think it's I feel like we're getting closer to where we'll know we need these sales processes, and so you may buy a package because they have those default processes that you use, but it's really around that versus the tools. Versus if you were to start being able to go after those models, from the AI environment, you could really customize them to your own usage and trust that they're using the best principles. Because this is again more your worlds than mine, but it just. I think if you could create natural language access to different data sources and do it you don't need to have the constraints that are still inherently implied with you on the SaaS packages.
Well, I actually think the SaaS packages are not much more. It's not really the process. It's just a default way to organize and store the data. That's what
UI on a database.
Yeah, it's what Salesforce is. I think, with an AI, you could use let's say a developer agent tool and say, just create, I want to store our sales data, and this is the data I care about, create a place to store it, and then people, and then we can have a tool that knows how to update that probably the AI creates, and then we can just have, an interface that basically has someone say, hey, add this to the list, and it's there. Right, we don't even need. No one needs to go into I know I've seen your list. One of them is around the human interface changes, and I think that is a change that will happen. Is that we begin to not have specific UIs and tools. We have more natural, whether it's voice, chat, but I think to me, voice much more so. Yeah, is the. Hey Siri, add this to the sales pipeline.
I agree. But by the way, I think
hey AI.
I'm with both of you on this in a slightly different angle of it. I think, which is, I do believe that SaaS is broadly dead. I think software is broadly dead, and that all I mean by that is that the current UI and UX is by and large irrelevant. Because to your point, I think that nobody, look, we had video games that were all text-based where you typed everything, and then we had graphics, and guess what immediately killed all the text-based games? Graphics, because people prefer it. And if we could have games that were voice-based and action-based and could interpret what you were doing around you and not have to input any data, that would be even better. And I think that's what will happen with software, broadly speaking, which is to say, if I hop on a call with a prospective client, A, that agent should know that I was on the call with that prospective client because it's integrated to my Outlook. It already knows that happened. B, the transcript of that meeting was already taken and already processed from my own note, should just be automatically then parsed and pushed over to whatever database CRUD that we actually have here. And that becomes sort of this integrated process by which I don't do any of that work. The UI is completely irrelevant. And if I had questions like, hey, what should I be doing today? The agent could just scan all of those and figure out who I should be calling today. Or if, Kevin, you're curious, how is North America performing? You would ask the same question and it could go query the entire database of all of the salespeople, quote unquote, and what they're up to. And I think that's what I imagine will happen here. That's why I think SaaS is dead in that regard. However, I think that is really just the embodiment of what you were saying about the processes. That is just some business process logic that's been embedded in that UI and that UX, which is like, hey, a piece of software that's great, Salesforce, they know how salespeople work. They know how they call. They know when they lose the lead. They know what to do with that. Whereas if you just did it in Excel, which you could easily do because it's not that complicated, the database behind this is not very complicated, doesn't have that native knowledge. You'd have to sort of build your own, and that's what you're getting for the SaaS. The difference there, I think, and this is where I disagree with you slightly, we'll see how it plays out this year. My guess is that agent is a bit like Gen AI was last year, where everybody will be talking about agentic systems and how they're building them and how amazing they are, and we're going to see very little value this year. That's my guess. We'll see very little value. It's still very complicated to integrate these systems, and the idea that you could have an agent actually truly have agency and start solving things on your behalf, I think is still quite a ways off. At least a year or two off. We'll see how fast it progresses this year, but that'd be we'll see. This is one where I'll take the opposite of you on this bet.
Polymarket bet on you.
Exactly. Exactly. We'll put it up there. I'd take the opposite of that. I think it'll take time because to that point, I haven't seen very many interfaces that are great for Gen AI. They're still largely, let me type a really long prompt into a screen that I think carefully about because I've spent time.
Can I give one example of why I think that?
Please.
Yeah, and this is
unless it's a good example, then no, because that'll counter my point.
It's a good example.
Well, no, you gotta be quiet now. Sorry, we have to let me win. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Good news is Vincent's agent can delete this one.
This is really I want to throw
AI agent, delete this portion of whatever Jason says.
I want to give some shout out to Peter Rangel, one of our architects who has really embraced this and done a great job, and he's built a series of agents out at a client where they are putting essentially directions of what they want done into Jira. So, in software you write a user story, hey, I want this feature added to the software, and basically written a set of templates that we put those in, or he's putting those in Jira in a certain format that then the agents can just read and go develop. And so it's pretty amazing. Today they're doing it by, I think, copying it manually into Chat or Copilot, one of the GPTs. But I do think there's nothing, the technology exists, Crew and others to do. And I think you're just going to start seeing a bunch of these use cases. But anyway, I know you're taking the other side of that.
No, I mean, I think that point is completely valid, but I would say the same was true last year with generative AI more broadly. I think if you knew the right prompt, we had 6-figure savings internally just on our annual review process that we did twice a year. I mean, that was huge savings, but it required a very thoughtful script that was sort of pre-generated. Our people just uploaded it and they got the results. I think that's where agentic AI will be this year. In some narrow domain for a few companies, they will work on solving these problems. They'll do a great job, and I think they will see results. But broadly speaking, I think it's just too complicated for the majority of companies, and they're going to talk a lot about it, and we're going to see very little return this year. That's my guess. We'll see that. We'll see. We'll take it.
I think this is not disagreeing with that. It's just going to be interesting if we take around the use case of performance management, or you take around the use case of interviewing, or then you take around the use case of travel and expense. I mean, do you start, this goes not to prove my point around processes, but I wonder if that's when, you start to tackle those different time, labor intensive that are low value and you go after it. One of the things that a different tangent, think about going back a bit to just use sales management. So Salesforce, about Salesforce specifically, but around your Salesforce, right? We know that you can connect, different today through APIs, right? You can connect different tools. So, I can do this calendar into this, so I can do tracking that. But I'm intrigued what the still real challenge around Salesforce management is around what is someone doing? How do you get the information from that? And what if you essentially can say, I don't care what tool you use, what meeting you recorded that, what phone you discussed that on, and really some of the AI driven tools will be able to capture all those different elements and then take them from all these different data sources and put them into something. Because I think data entry still is a fundamental problem in almost everything that we do. And I think that's what I'm intrigued on is that, does it make it easier to just do that through the normal course? And even like Jason, you were talking about, I would still say, agent do this. Well, when we get to the point where agent just does it, they just track and monitor, which again, for some people, that'll be really scary. For others, it'll be really freeing because that'll just happen. Again, it can happen today if you structure your life and tools in a way that are all integrated. But when you start talking about thousands of people and working in a company in different ways you do it, it's hard.
Case in point, we all have to do our expenses every week, and we all send our expenses to a person, and that person does our expense reports. Not necessary.
No, and Expensify has been doing it for years. But no, but this is.
I'm sure she would love to. It's back to does that
sure.
impact people? I think very positively because I'm sure she would love to not do them.
Right. Yeah. No, I think this is my point though. Is that I think that all of the technology is actually there. But figuring out how do you stitch it together intelligently is the part that will take some amount of time to work out. And I'm skeptical we can do that in 25. We'll see. I think it's definitely a 26 or 27.
How weird is this? This is a new year for sure. Vincent is the AI skeptic this year.
No, I think generative AI will deliver results. I think you will see that this year. I think that the agentic workflows of really killing SaaS is at least a year or two off. Because I think you have to have the narrowly defined use cases solved well, and then realize, oh shoot, actually we've solved 8 out of the 10 pieces to remove all of Salesforce. Why don't we just do the last 2 now? We know how to stitch it together.
I think we're not that far apart. I think that broad adoption is maybe not this year. I'm just thinking that it will become a really
I think it's
proven as a way to deliver value.
I think that's all you will hear about.
We've gotten through one in 30 minutes, so
we're doing good. That's great.
Well, this is the next.
We got 10, so that's
but I think what's going to be
minutes.
interesting too is how do we continue to calculate the degree of risk of wrong data you're willing to assume,
right?
And I think that's one thing that's kind of interesting too. Like go back to the expense account, man. If I can streamline the process, it's going to take some liberties. It's going to work through that. Like there is a degree of risk that I'm willing to have it probably as a company, probably as an individual to have it be potentially wrong. And, I think that's the one thing as we continue to have more of these things just purely automated that, there's really no more controls on whether or not it's right or wrong or what degree of accuracy. And so how we think about that in almost anything is going to be different. And we know there's fallacy in almost everything we do today, but you don't think about it as much. But I'm intrigued by the other silly example that Vincent and I were sharing. We were talking about my wife and I were doing calendar planning and trying to figure out, well, what's the 2026 holiday schedule and for our different school districts that our kids are in. And we got answers through Gemini, which was great. But then we were trying to go back, well, were they actually based on any actual document or were they just Gemini making it up based on what the calendar was? And which that was team wife. She thought that was the answer. I had more faith in Gemini that it would actually find a document, which it did indeed find a public open meeting law from last week. But it was interesting. But I had to dig down to find that. And again, really silly, stupid example, but it's going to be intriguing of like, how much do we accept the quick responses that come back versus really trying to know what was that based on, inference or actual data?
Yeah, I think it's a silly example. I think it's an amazing example that highlights so many things that we should dig into at some point. But one of them being that Google is amazing at search. And they've really leaned into how do we take that superpower and empower our agents to do something that ChatGPT is still fairly mediocre at, if we're being honest, right? It can now go do real-time search queries. It has for a while, but it's not great. when you watch Gemini do that, it's a lot better. It's a lot better at that. Yeah. So especially with deep research now, like that's a phenomenal capability.
Yeah, it really is. By the way, you stole one of my predictions around ethics and accountability and all of that. That was going to be my
you're sneaking in all your predictions into the first. That's why it's taking so long. That's why it's taking so long. It's okay. We'll move on.
It's a great point, though. It really is a great point that how do we know they're correct? And again, how do we know the ones that people develop are correct? They're likely not, but we have these large testing cycles, right? And so, but now how do we test something when the next time it runs, it may do something differently?
Well, I think it just depends too a bit on, what are you doing with that information? This has always been true, right? I mean, early days of the internet when we were growing up and hey, don't trust anything on the internet. I mean, it was so much more convenient and it was right enough that I often would and try and find some paper book that would effectively validate that, right? Now, actually, paper books are probably more incorrect than the internet because they're more out of date. And so I think that, if it's something critical, like you're planning a vacation that's non-refundable, maybe you wait for the official calendar. If you're planning a vacation to visit family where you could adjust things if worst case scenario, if it came to it, then maybe you go for it. I think these are the things where people naturally make these decisions already. It's just, to your point, it's not how we typically think about it. I mean, even if we had a human doing our expenses, back to this example, like there are still mistakes being made. I've caught one or two over time. Like there's a convenience there and a value for me that I'm willing to take that risk. And maybe I'll double check the really expensive stuff. So if I have a really big expense, I'll just double check, hey, did I get that money at least? Okay, the $5 at Starbucks, well, it's at least 10 probably, but whatever, I'll let that go. The soda machine at the airport, there we go, that's $5 now. The Coke at the airport, I won't double check that one, but for the big stuff I will. And so I think this dynamic risk reward will continue to be in play.
Well, and I think on that too is like I think accuracy has become so important in areas where I don't think it's necessary. And you think about it also just from a legal perspective, right? And I think that we don't control as much as human condition is. You want to control everything, and you just don't. And actually, I think it's healthy for us to get a little bit more of that into the equation. But yeah, that's a different philosophical podcast.
Yeah. Well, we can cover that one on topic 3 or whatever it is. Okay. What's the
next? So we talked previously about.
I'm trying to get to lunch if y'all haven't guessed. Right.
I love it. Well, we talked previously about this idea of edge compute in IoT specifically. I kicked off the last one. You want to kick off this one, Jason? What are your predictions about what's going to happen with IoT and Edge this year in 2025?
Oh wow. I had 2 here. One was, which I think is already happening, is you're going to see a lot of these robots and different form factors of robot be available with APIs, and people really start integrating them into their workflows. And we have another client that has robots, that these little ones that they're not expensive. There's an API. They use them to move things around their factory floor. Pretty amazing. Pretty simple, use cases, but also very inexpensive. That was one. And the other one was that you see a lot of. We talked a little bit about the FDA clearing the AirPods as hearing aids, and you see that pave the way for a lot of other devices that take, and we see them, the Whoop and all of these things that can track your heart rate and your EKG and your breathing and all these things, that those become, acceptable as input, right? Do you actually not have to go into the doctor and do an EKG?
Yeah.
And they'll just take that as input.
It's actually funny you say that. I saw, Withings, I think I say their company name. The company makes all the smart scales and blood pressure cuffs, etc. They actually advertised on their latest devices telehealth. So they have a new device that's coming out. It does your temperature, touchless, nothing too surprising there. It does your EKG, which is mildly interesting, I suppose, for people who don't have an Apple Watch at least. It does a stethoscope for your heart specifically. And I feel like there was one more thing that it did. Anyway, under the sort of at CES, the big selling point was accepted for telehealth appointments. So to the point, you do a telehealth today, what do they do? Like, hey, what's your temperature? Well, what if you had a device they could actually then trust more that it could validate. Like, yes, your heart sounds good, or no, it sounds like you have some kind of, I don't know, arrhythmia, or it sounds like you have some kind of fluttering valve, or whatever it happens to be for the stethoscope specifically. At least there's somebody who can interpret that for you in a new way, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Or at least there'll be some agent that can interpret it for you.
That's right. Yeah, some agent that'll do it. Okay, touche. Well played. Yeah, fair. So those are your two. Those are your two
those
predictions.
are my two.
That's it. That's all you have for Edge is that it'll be edgy this year.
Yeah, it wasn't very edgy of you.
Know,
I was like,
the health and robots.
I think
robots.
So this is the big takeaway for me at CES this year is that, again, AI was whitewashing everything. That's peak. I think we'll see results next year. 2 was the next wave of innovation will really come from robotics. And I think that, I looked into this more. I mean, they're everywhere, by the way. Like, there were so many vendors of robots. We touched and played with, at least a dozen of them. All humanoid, dog robots, rolling robot, every kind of robot in every kind of form factor you can imagine was there. And they were actually pretty affordable. We're talking like $1,600 for a little dog robot, like Boston Dynamics version, but cheaper. Not Boston Dynamics dog, but cheaper. And then we had a humanoid that was a couple grand.
You got to put the video of the Phil pushing him pushing it. That thing is creepy. It kind of.
I will say all of the robots are a little bit unnerving. And for good reason. We've already seen this video from China, for example, where they've taken the DJI type dog robot, and I don't think it's made by DJI. I should probably take that back, but some dog robot. I forget who made it, and they actually mounted a gun on it already. Like, that's a thing that really exists. They are creepy. They are definitely scary and the things of nightmares and horror movies for sure. But they're really impressive. I think that, this idea that you can push them. Phil pushed on that thing pretty hard, and it didn't even really move, and he pushed really hard, and it took a step back, but caught itself, and it was.
Oh, it's sturdy. It is. You can give him a little shove. That's crazy.
Totally reasonable. Now that robot knows who it is, and as soon as it becomes, as soon as it becomes,
punch him in the stomach.
Exactly right. So I think
push back and Phil goes flying.
Just a little push, exactly. Yeah, broken ribs. I do think that
good thing at telemedicine will be able to tell him what to do with it.
What's happened? I looked at this more, but what's really happened? The breakthroughs in this are actually a little bit of generative AI. So the idea that you can talk to these things is actually quite helpful for them now, as opposed to what was the modality of interaction before. Not great. So that's good. But 2, it's really that generative AI, especially the ChatGPT and other models, have spent a lot of energy on multimodal. So how do you take video? How do you take voice? How do you take text and sort of fuse it together in a way that you can get more information out of it? Like, what do all these things mean? For robotics, that's actually really important. So you can have an instruction manual of like how to wash the dishes. You can have a video of how to wash the dishes. You can have somebody controlling it, to actually move and make it wash the dishes. Mm-hmm. But historically, they've struggled to fuse those 3 different inputs together in a meaningful way. With the progressive progress we've made in generative AI, actually, they're using those same techniques to do it for robotics, and that becomes a huge thing. Additionally, all the extra compute to do the simulations that are a lot more robust. And we're getting really good at that, massive computers, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the big breakthroughs that I think will be a big deal. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and I think you'll see it in a lot of safety-related use cases. So like today, you see the bomb squad has a bomb robot, right? And
Sure.
But think about how many use cases there are where people are really physically at risk. Changing the light bulbs on the outside of Reunion Tower in Dallas, or even washing the windows, or fixing down highline wires, or those are things that maybe someone with a maybe VR can work with to make sure it's done right, instruct the and don't burn the countryside down, but can work through VR with the robot and fix some of these things without having to put themselves physically at risk, but also just from a time savings perspective is you can send 2 robots into 2 different places and work with one to fix this thing and work with one to fix that thing. So energy and all of, whether it be oil and gas production or downstream transmission line failures, those kind of things. I think there's just a whole lot of use cases with that.
Or farming, walk around the farm and look for stuff, look at plants, interact with things. No doubt. I mean, warehousing, for example, there's a lot of use cases for sure. And I think it's actually why it's so interesting that people are choosing humanoid shapes is because they recognize the world we've sort of built the world around the human physique and shape and our capabilities. And so it makes sense to adapt robots towards that. The other thing I'd say about Edge and IoT is that from my standpoint, again, I think we're going to see a continued move towards these models running on the edge. If you just think about the compute, to your point earlier, it's expensive, it's difficult to get. Well, what happens when you can actually make profit off of doing compute? You're like, well, how? I can't
Like the SETI model?
Yeah, effectively. But I actually mean it even more than that, which is to say, today, if you're Amazon and you get somebody to have some new Gen AI model running, that's wonderful for you. You can start making money off that. But if you're any other company, you can't. Unless you can get your end user to buy the device that has the compute on it, pay for the electricity, so running it, pay for the maintenance, pay for the upgrade, and all of that has a profit margin for you. And so I think putting more devices with models running on them will necessitate a continued upgrade cycle in a way that, video cameras today don't have. But when they have a chip on them that has to process all the video processing you want to do at your own cost, not their cost, then you have to upgrade the thing because you want to have not only facial recognition, you don't have people detection, you want to have facial recognition now. Well, that's going to require the new chip with the new whatever. And so I think companies will recognize that now is the chance to actually start making devices again and have that be the forced upgrade cycle is through the software that runs on those things, which will be necessarily constrained a bit like the iPhone. So you can't have Apple intelligence without having one of the latest 2 new iPhones. Why?
Because of the chip.
Because of the chip, allegedly. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the reason they then say, if you want it, you have to get the new phone. So I think that's what you're going to see with devices. So these microphones, for example, people buy them, they're very popular. They got very popular because of streaming. Cool. What happens if I have to buy 3 new ones 2 years from now because they have an AI on them that does all of the voice, automatically removes filler words or gets rid of hissing sounds or isolates your voice better? What happens 3 years after that when it makes your voice sound like, I don't know, somebody famous? I don't know. You know what I mean? But I think that's where you'll continue to see is that these things will be processed on the edge because it saves the company money and they can start profiting and it forces an upgrade cycle they don't currently have.
Question on from what you guys saw last week or just even in general, when you think about robotics, think about all the different companies right now that are working on that. How does that start to rationalize? I mean, how many different versions do we need? How many different elements? Obviously, there's the form, there's the software, there's all these different components to it. There's different, even within the form, right? Well, I specialize in the movement between X, Y, and Z. But it is intriguing right now of it's not efficient to have every single company go after these different things.
I think the market's huge, actually. Yeah. I do think the market is really, really big. I don't think it makes sense for all of them, but I do think it makes a ton of sense if you're a VC, I would keep funding them. If I were a VC starting up a new fund, and there were a brand new robotics company that was doing something even better, I would totally fund them. My rationale is that if you think about all of the things in your life that require a human to do something, that's a lot of stuff. So today, I'll speak for myself. We have a lawn care company. Why? I should have a robot do that. I don't need I'm just gonna have a robot do that for me.
Just get a goat.
Get a goat, exactly. But it could pick weeds. It could plant plants for me. It could go. Goats can't plant new flowers, but close enough, yeah. But I mean, that's it. That's something that they could do. Cleaning, for example, just picking up around the house. We have 3 kids. Stuff's always left out. Having a full-time maid, effectively, always just picking up after the kids would be amazing. Taking them and playing in the jungle gym would be amazing. Having the nanny style. Having somebody go pick up my dry cleaning or pick up our lunch today so that you could have lunch and not have to record a podcast. It'd be right here. I think these kinds of things are going to be a real big deal at the consumer level. But I think even more importantly and probably primary to that will be in the commercial and industrial setting specifically. So I think that, we talked last year at CES, one of the big things we saw was robotics inside of kitchens. So having a robot that can make a pizza or can make cotton candy or could flip burgers at McDonald's for you. That was the big move. We still haven't seen that massive adoption yet, but I think that will be the first place we see it is what happens when you don't need like line cooks anymore because these robot arms can do all that for you? What happens if you don't need a mechanic to change oil anymore because they can do it all for you? What happens? We saw this actually was a cool little vending machine type idea. You put your hands in and it does gel nails for you, custom. So like you design it on the screen, whatever colors you want, whatever pattern you want, and you just put your hand in, the little robot paints it on perfectly for you. I think these are the kinds of things where robots will actually take over a huge swath of the services market.
I think the answer to your question, though, is, in my mind, it can go one of two ways, right? Like, if things are really specialized, you end up with a lot of them. That's why you have 500 mouse vendors and 500 keyboard vendors and 500 printer vendors and 500, whatever peripheral vendor. If they become general purpose, they become much more like we have Apple and iPhone, right? We have one or two of them. And so will the robots be like, will it be such that, well, I need a very specific one to mow the lawn. I need a different one to do, pick up after the kids. Someone else needs a different one to fix the highline wires. And I think it will depend on how good and accurate those robots can get. If they are not able to get really good at general purpose, you'll see many of them. If they are able to get one that can do all of those things, which I think is probably likely, you'll probably see them consolidate down into a very few. So my bet would be on a smaller number of consolidated. Maybe at the beginning there's some, specialized one, but ultimately I think the cost becomes too much to not have them general purpose.
I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying. So even if they're general purpose, though, the market's so big it could support many players. Like, in order to have just a few winners, you'd have to have some economic moat around that business, some true differentiation that others couldn't break into, like some network type effect. Would be
I think you end up with modules, like software modules. Like, again, all the hardware is essentially the same. Mm-hmm. You end up with, like, let me buy the Gardener module for $50. Let me buy the...
Oh, gosh, I hope not, by the way. Like,
it becomes a market. Like, the one thing that I want to talk is the marketplace of marketplace of agents, marketplace of capabilities for your robot. I mean, why not? I mean,
killing me here. Don't give people ideas like that.
Well, that's the whole point of this prediction.
Jason bought the lawn cutting module, but didn't buy the weed picking module.
Exactly. Yeah, like, oh, geez.
But maybe this is what Altman meant when he talked about AI is going to ultimately have us eat bonbons all day long, because it's really what we're talking about. But it's really the robotics that are being empowered by the tools. But it's interesting in kind of putting the threads together of like going back to, we're all still talking about human capital. Really, it's around human savings, how that plays out. It's going to be interesting how that creates, additional exploration and whatever the different elements will be, because those will come. But it's also just, this is a little bit morbid thought, but just even intriguing. And as you see in the Western worlds, birth rates and things like that decline, you start to see a rise of a service class that can be, robotic in nature. Some of that gets mitigated, through those concerns of that. But it's just it's intriguing. It's going to be also just like any other technical advancement. You think about the different parts of the world that are in different parts of their curve. How will this change? Think about a robotic agricultural workforce, what that would do for Africa versus, different elements of that. So just It's intriguing. I mean, this is where I get excited, even though it obviously involves a lot of different change. But it is intriguing to think about, what will happen and what you do. And then, frankly, I mean, I do believe the best computer is still the human mind. So, like, what happens with what does that capacity do? Hopefully, it's useful things and it takes us to places we haven't thought about before. But
yeah, I mean, you'll always have to have at least in the initial point, you'll have to have the robot repairman. And now maybe, okay, we'll build another robot to fix that, but that one will have to be fixed. And
I don't know if you follow 3D printing at all, by the way, but there's a company who now uses their 3D printers to make the 3D printers. And I was like, oh, that seems like the beginning of the
turtles all the way down, right?
Actually, one of our clients does that. Yeah. But what I think it's what I think about too is we've talked about the human form, because that's what so much is optimized for the human form. But if you take one step past thinking that it's robotics doing all the work, well, how much will that start to just really change? I mean, your example of the nail tech is a really interesting example. You could see a company trying to create a nail tech in a humanotic robotic form, whereas someone just jumps that and just goes right to, well, here's a different looking machine that does the same thing. So
yeah, no doubt. Okay, moving on. Equally terrifying, quantum. You gonna kick us off with this one? Quantum computing. What do you? Fun to Jason. Okay, fair enough, Jason.
I'm generally very bullish on it. On quantum computing, I think that there are a lot of great use cases. I think the tech they'll fix the error problems, and it'll have to be because of the cost and the cold storage requirements. It will not happen in 2025, right? Yeah. This is a decade out. I mean, we're at essentially the first integrated circuit. On top of that, there's got to be operating systems and software and libraries and user interfaces and all of the things that have to be built in order for that thing to be commercially viable. So I still think it's a ways out, 10 years out, but I do think that it will be ultimately solve. I think a lot of the problem, and I know your point may be no, because the LLMs are going to solve those. We talked about that. Is the LLM can make a good guess that you can validate, but I do think for all of the use cases where you have to be right, it'll.
I like, by the way, that you're assuming quantum is deterministic, and you will for sure get wrong
exactly.
Answers, okay,
fair enough.
Fair, yeah. No, I look, I'm with you on this one. I don't think anything in 2025. I think we'll keep seeing progress. I think it's really far off. I'm not even convinced that I know the killer use case for quantum beyond breaking all cryptography, which is a pretty lousy killer use case. It will kill everybody because we'll have nothing that's secure anymore, and all of our financials are dead. But I don't think it's gonna happen this year. So, related but distinct. Speaking of breaking codes, cybersecurity. Jason, thoughts 2025 cybersecurity?
Well, if we're betting money, can I just bet there'll be a cybersecurity event next year?
I don't think anybody went to the other side of that bet, unfortunately.
Not to make this the AI edition or an all AI edition, but I think that you're going to see people start deploying AI to secure things.
Tell me more.
So,
what do you mean?
Today security is done largely manually. When I say manually, what I mean is we come up with policies. It's a person that usually does that. For each policy, we come up with a set of controls to implement, and we're going to, stuff has to be encrypted. That's a policy. This type of data has to be encrypted. Okay, we're going to put it on these drives, and it has to be secured with this encryption algorithm and these keys. That's a control or an implementation. And then someone comes along, an auditor, to say, yes, you did those things, and you're secure. That's from a governance, risk, compliance perspective. And then from a ongoing management perspective, you have a scene, there's tools that look and make sure that data hasn't changed, look for breaches, look for evidence of those things, tries to get in and do them. Some of that's automated, some of it you can hire a third party to go and try to break in, and they'll generate you a report. Either this happened, which we have to go resolve, or here's a report for you of the ways the white hat hackers got in, and you need to go fix these things. But that is all pretty much 100% manual, someone involved process.
What about all of those cool cutting edge cybersecurity companies? They're using
Wiz. Yeah. They're just monitoring. They're just looking at your setup and saying, here's the best practices. Don't leave this port open. Don't use.
What about one CyberStrike, these companies that do DDoS? That stuff is
that stuff is automated. But that's
very small relative to the sort of landscape you're saying.
Exactly. Okay. And so, I'm talking about in terms of response to those inbound things.
Sure.
Like setting protections, monitoring. This kind of idea of Do we have people monitoring? Do we have software monitoring these services? AI is looking at, in a lot of ways, that's what some of the DDoS protection, Akamai, these others, they're not traditional AI, they're machine learning.
Right.
They learn these traffic patterns. That looks bad, block it. Right. It goes into learning mode for a while, and then we block. But I think, and a lot of the cloud vendors have a lot of those type solutions, but I do think you'll see more AI more AI driving that. And in other words, like, look at this, where are our vulnerabilities, go fix that, and have it truly drive the implementations as opposed to people.
Yeah, that's good. My prediction for 25 is related to my first prediction, which is as companies actually start developing real solutions that leverage generative AI, they're going to recognize that, in fact, generative AI has intrinsic vulnerabilities to it. The nature of the math prevents you from blocking the intrinsic vulnerabilities. And so I think people will start recognizing that, oh shit, we have to secure these models and treat them different than we currently are. And I think that'll be a big move this year, is that how do you actually have LLMs that are genuinely safe to be running in the public internet? And that's an incredibly difficult problem that very few are trying to solve right now. And so I think that'll be the big trend in my mind for 25. Kevin, any thoughts on either of those?
Yeah, I'll give you one. It's a corollary of that trend. And maybe you guys, since you're more early adopters, would have said this was 2024. But I just think the risk of you not using these tools in your just every day-to-day will be much more apparent. Just as you have different elements of when your skills age out, for lack of a better word, usually that is an age issue. But I think that this year we'll start to see that you just won't be able to perform if you've not found ways to integrate them into your day-to-day experience as an individual in a company and as a company in writ large. And I think even increasingly in your life. And yeah, it's always fascinating watching your children who don't know any different start to use the tools and how that plays and how that changes their perspective and what they do. But this particular, the AI usage, I think, is a chance to disrupt the workforce in ways that we probably haven't seen since really early internet. So it'll be intriguing to see how companies and how individuals respond to that.
It's a great one, yeah.
The other interesting thing about because you said cybersecurity and regulation.
No, the next one's regulation.
What's that?
No, the next one's regulation.
Oh, sorry.
So let's go to the next trend.
That is the great. Okay. That's the great equalizer unknown.
That's right. So 2025 predictions on policy regulation specifically. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, the new administration has, been staffed with a lot of tech leaders who are very publicly against regulation and are very for using AI in taking the handcuffs off, so to speak. Right. And so I think that, I don't know that is a prediction as much as it is a result of the last election.
Well, I guess the prediction would be, do you think they're going to be successful? I mean, there's a lot of sort of deep state government, pure professional bureaucrats who have pretty clearly been against these kinds of things historically.
There are a lot of people against a lot of changes at Twitter.
I agree. I mean,
and they're all gone now. So
I think this starts to get into different philosophical views. But if we take a view that life's too expensive the way it's going, that we're going to need to have different things, I think that it's an intriguing kind of subplot to this year, whether or not the patience it will require to force change in a public environment. Will the people that are doing that have the fortitude to be able to go through the resistance they're going to face? Mm-hmm. And I think if I look at just how expensive, just take a simple example of like the only place pensions exist anymore are in public sector. And they're incredibly expensive, right? Reducing the labor force is a significant. That will, in a world where our interest now is more than our defense spending, reducing expenses are going to be really, really important. And that has huge implications to people's lives and whatever else. And I think, so to me, it's intriguing by some of these things are really around, it's starting to predict potentially what the future we're going to have is and where we're going to spend that. But it's going to require a significant amount of change. And So I'm intrigued by it. It's not really a prediction, but I guess maybe my prediction is it'll be harder than anyone thinks. And I hope that people have the fortitude to try to really ask some of these questions. We've conveniently kicked the can down the road on a lot of big decisions that I think actually, I wonder if the day of reckoning is sooner than maybe we anticipated.
Yeah, that's good. I think my prediction on this will be it will seem like pure chaos in 25. I think that's my best guess. To the extent that Doge actually sticks around and does something, I can't imagine trying to unwind the ball of yarn that is our federal government. I can't even begin to imagine how difficult that would be. And Elon's strategy, by the way, historically stated publicly, is to go too deep on purpose and then quickly hire back.
That's the Gordian knot problem.
Yeah, it's literally his stated strategies. Like, I will cut too deep. They did at Twitter. And then he quickly hired back the few people that he overcut by. And people thought he was a complete idiot. But it worked. All I'm saying is X now is a quarter of the people, less than a quarter of the people, and it's running. That's amazing. I mean, and it's running huge events, bigger than they've had before, with some hiccups, no doubt, but it's working. That's a really big shift. And I think that, if you think about that for our government, that could mean your passports don't get done in time, or it could be that your visa gets denied and when it shouldn't have been. Like, it'll have real implications for people. And that's the difference, I think, between Twitter or X and our government, is that people's lives do depend on the government in many cases. If you cut too deep, that has different kinds of implications. But I do think it'll seem like chaos this year. My guess is that it works pretty well once you work through that, but we'll see, I guess. We'll see. Yeah. I don't know. It's a really big machine.
Yeah, I think there's so many, like the IRS, right? So whether you simplify the tax rules or make them more complex, like a piece of software can figure it out. Now, you may say, well, there could be fraud and other things. Software is pretty good at figuring that out. Look at credit cards, much better than humans. And that to me is a process that can be 100% automated.
Yeah, I think the reason it hasn't been historically is that there's strong lobbying groups that don't want it to be fully automated. I mean, the government effectively knows what you should pay. Yeah. So why not just start that as a default? Like, here's what we think you owe. You can disagree. If you just did that, there are people who disagree, and that's fine. But the burden of work on the IRS would be de minimis relative to what it is today. What would be my guess? We'll see.
Those are the type of things where I think there's just, to your point, we've been kicking the can down the road on all of these efficiencies, and can we still afford to pay, I don't know how many billions of dollars for all IRS agents? Right. Or
I think we
want to use that to actually provide services people want. People in North Carolina or California right now would probably like to have that money go into somewhere besides IRS agents looking through tax returns.
Well, I know we're running out of time today, but I think and this is the California thing's intriguing to me, and I know that we're in the middle of people today having huge disruption. So it's not quite yet time to be thinking about the future, but I'm intrigued by an environment that has gotten itself to where, depending on your perspective or what you believe or hear, it takes 2 years to do anything construction related at minimum. Mm-hmm. Well, now you're going to have thousands of people that are needing of dwellings and homes, and you have to rebuild in a mass scale that can't work in the environment that it was in. And so I'm intrigued by, well, what does that mean? And what does that mean by the change? Is it change, permanent change? But there is not going to be the ability to do, unless people just rapidly move out of California, which is, so I'm just seeing, again, I know I'm early and it's insensitive in the moment of what's going on in people's lives today, but it's intriguing use case of it's going to force a lot of decisions that haven't been made that are going to have can't work the way it was working. So it's going to be intriguing to see what happens. So
no doubt. Cloud and serverless, Jason, go.
Cloud and serverless, I think, will have an increased rate of adoption. I think most people are using cloud, but not serverless. There was an interesting report out, 451 Research came up with, and they looked at, I can't remember, maybe it was 3,000 companies. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But they found that serverless had a 35% cut in costs.
Yeah, amazing.
And so I think you'll see, for that and a lot of other reasons, it's just simpler. and faster, you'll see continued increase usage in serverless.
Okay. Nothing to disagree with on that. I agree. I don't
It's
think
just too easy. Like at this point, it's
no brainer.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting to me, going back to the whole points around edge. It's going to be interesting. Yeah, maybe it goes cloudless, serverless from an infrastructure perspective, but like control, I think is going to be interesting. I think that you'll see more private control again of those services, even if they're still using,
What do you mean by that?
Well, we think a few years ago, I talked about private cloud, right? So it's not, again, I know I'm not technical, and I'm sure I'm not using the terms correct, but I think about a world where you've removed all that, you're using those elements, but, am I loading that someplace else up that I don't control, or do I control my own ecosystem?
Oh, right.
Again?
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, so it's serverless, but yes, I still control it though within my own walls.
Yes.
I think so. It's going to be interesting. Of like, my initial reaction is like the terms don't mean anything anymore. So
yeah. Well, the only pushback I give you on that one is back to my IoT and Edge. I think more will move to the edge, and then it does raise this question of like, well, what lives in the cloud versus the edge, and how do you distribute those loads? I think the cloud will still be required. There's no doubt about that in my mind. I think that moving there, if you're not there, is wise, and you should. But as you're having more edge devices, how do they intelligently cache data so you don't send everything to the cloud, process locally, rebuild models locally, and then only send the appropriate stuff back to the cloud? I think that'll be the question that we see in 25.
I think there's a lot of those type of use cases where, again, the serverless technologies make that easier.
That's right.
Right. And who wants to figure out how to set up the servers to do that kind of thing?
Nobody. My favorite: human technology, human computer interfaces. The cool thing I saw at CES last year, and I saw a lot more this year, and these already sort of hit the public domain thanks to Meta, are glasses. So I think glasses, being like wearing glasses that actually have a screen on them, is getting to a point it's really quite good. It's quite impressive, pretty good resolution, pretty good display. If you get to a world where you can do the compute locally and have a battery that were adequately large for really efficient computing anyway, I think that will be a massive breakthrough. And then I think secondly, voice. I think we're going to see more and more with voice of how do you interact with computers with your voice in a way that we've all wanted to for a long time, but it's been too difficult historically.
So there's going to be something that's going to make me talk slower?
No, I think you can talk even faster. What do they care? They can slow it down themselves.
Yeah,
exactly. They can slow it down and they can play it back at whatever speed they want then effectively. But I think that...
You can all hear it individually. You can have your custom speed that you want to hear it.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that, there's some really cool examples that I saw with real-time translation, for example, where you would have a device in your ear, you would just speak to the other person, it would then replay that in their native language.
I don't know why that is not on every...
Teams,
earbud, Bose, AirPods. Like, I don't know why that's not going to be there tomorrow, right?
I think we're very close to that. I think we're, maybe probably this year. I think we're one generation of technology away from it.
I agree with the voice and audio piece. I'm going to take the other side of glasses.
Okay.
Like, I don't want to wear my own glasses, and people that don't have to wear glasses, trust me, you don't want to have to wear glasses. I mean, they're big, they're bulky, they fall off, then you need sunglasses, and then you have to get prescription sunglasses. They're expensive. And I just think that in the end, the voice modality is so much easier, right? So much better.
I agree, except for somebody once pointed out, a friend of this pod actually pointed out once that, I was imagining the best use of computers in the internet. The majority of people like just doom scroll on Twitter, X, or they doom scroll on Instagram, and those you can't really do over voice. You just gotta see it. And so, in that regard, I do think.
Yeah, but you don't want to do that you don't want to see that in your glasses.
Sure you do. They have full color displays now. It's like high resolution, full color, right there on your eyes. You're just like staring at Kevin during a meeting, and just doom scrolling on Instagram. It'll be great.
It's gonna be.
Yeah, it's gonna be awful. It's gonna be just absolutely.
Well, the good
horrible.
news is we've discussed for the first hour of this pod that machines are gonna do everything for us, so you can be doing that and still get your job done. You just have.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay, last question for you guys. I know we're way over on time here. They're going to cut this podcast, and you're going to be late to your next meeting, or probably already are. But future of work, tech work, hybrid, remote, local, what's going on? What are your thoughts? I'll let you kick it off, Kevin.
I think all trends right now are going to go back to the office, whether that's a long-term trend or it's just, again, still kind of right-sizing what we're doing. But, I mean, you're seeing too many companies do that. I think that's partly to figure out who's really going to be committed to working what they're at. I do think though, like we've talked before, I think ultimately it'll be a competitive strategy for companies to choose what they want to do. But I think it'll be a sorting mechanism for most large companies today to get people back. I think your smaller companies will, if they have a distributed workforce, they'll do it that way. If they're local and they want to work together, they'll do it because it's more energizing. But I think the trends of going back to the office are only increasing, as was evidenced by my commute time this morning on Monday morning.
Yeah, no doubt. You can really tell, by the way, what day of the week it is by just how busy it is. Yeah. Jason, thoughts?
I think that there is a tremendous value in working in person together, both from a creativity, and there's been studies that shown that creativity is increased when you're together for human connection, and just we're about to go have lunch this in the afternoon because we're here. I just think there's so many benefits, and we had a period of the last 5 years where we've tried to convince ourselves that those benefits don't exist. And I'm going to get tons of hate mail now. I know that I am around I'm so much more. Yes. Hate email. Or is it hate email or hate mail? Anyway, either one. But that I'm so much, and I don't have to do my commute. But the reality is,
no.
Okay, you're not. You may think you are. You may feel that way. Just study after study has shown that it's not true. Companies are doing it again, whether it's a sorting mechanism or whether you believe that it is more efficient, doesn't really matter why. They're going to do it. And so I think there will be, there's several this week that came out and announced it. And I can't see what I really think will be interesting, and only time will tell. Again, what I'm quoting, what we've seen are these kind of scientific studies, limited studies. But now we're going to have a real experiment. The companies that do and the companies that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think we don't really need to have a debate.
Yeah.
Right? Either one will be better than the other, and those companies will naturally, the cream will rise to the top and the other ones will just go away. Or one won't perform better, and then people can pick, to your point, we're going to do this way, and people will have the choice to go do which meets for them. But it'll be the natural result of the experiment. We don't have to actually figure it out.
I think the funny thing is, and I brought this up when we first started talking about hybrid, and we already had that study though. It's called IBM.
Back in the
it's called
80s. Yahoo, exactly.
And both those companies have effectively failed. Yahoo entirely. IBM, it's not nearly what it used to be. I think we already saw what happened. It doesn't really work. I think that I would believe, I have no reason to believe this other than it just makes sense to me. I would believe that there are some people who do perform better in an isolated, quiet environment, just personality, genetics, whatever. I believe that's quite possible.
Yep.
I think by and large, the majority of people do not. I think academic study after academic study, real life example after real life example demonstrates that you cannot run a company like that very well. There are some exceptions. Back to the point, maybe they're great at isolating just the people who are better in this. I don't know. But at scale, it doesn't seem to work. And it makes sense it doesn't really work. Again, to the extent that you believe that we had societies form for the betterment of humanity and people evolved in that way, it makes sense that you should probably be in a community at work and that all of the good things would naturally happen as a result. And I think that's what we see. So,
well, not to continue this thread, but this may be fun to pick up on a certain time. It's possible you'll see a rise again of regional offices.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see different things. Going back, you had such concentration of movement for different elements, but if technology starts to really lower the barrier for different types of skills, could you have really the Northern California experience kind of happen in different parts around the world? And so, and because it's just, at some point, it goes back to the cost of living too.
That's right.
You know what I mean? I think that's what's intriguing about seeing everyone go back, and just even in, three of us are based in Dallas, and Dallas is quite a bit larger today than it was in 2020. And so now you see it and feel it, what that means for your life. Like many other big cities have done that before. Well, there's a lot of Rust Belt cities that have a lot of things to offer, but potentially, you know, part of that is going to be higher quality of life associated with some of these elements. And you see your companies putting up shop with.
No doubt. And I think this is where, you know, I would love for it to be true, because you know, if I ever want a job outside of Credera, and Credera is great, but you know, if I want a job, there aren't the jobs that I'd really want here. You know, those companies have to move somewhere, because I don't want to do the remote thing. I know it's not going to work for me personally. I don't think it's great for my career broadly, so I'd have to move somewhere else. So is there some other kind of alternative model? And I think that's where a company could really differentiate themselves. If they could crack the code on how do we have these regionalized models to get talent that doesn't want to move to California again for whatever reason, or Seattle, or, you know, New York, then what would it look like to do that elsewhere? And I think if you can crack that, it's a great one.
Well, just even like, you know, we've talked a lot about SaaS. Well, let's go back to the original SaaS company, and you know, they chose that as part of their strategy, right, where they locate it, and I think that worked very well for them. Again, that's a generation ago, but right. I think you often do look back to find the things that worked, and maybe it's going to be how that applies now to this new world order that we're working in.
Yeah, and look, I mean, a lot of people moved to the places where those companies were. I mean, Silicon Valley wasn't Silicon Valley of software until it was, because everybody wanted to move there. That's where the companies started to get access to it. And then Seattle had something similar to happen, tapping into the Microsoft